Heavy heart, out on the road. Long time since I've been home. Feels like I'm running back to you.
Welcome to My Comic Shop History. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. This is the second of three specials tying into the release of the documentary film My Comic Shop Country, available now to purchase or rent on iTunes and Amazon. This is our special Q&A episode where I answer your questions. And joining me is a very special guest. Welcome back to the show, my wife, Stephanie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me back, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to hear your responses tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing this. I mean, we're stuck together in quarantine, and this is adding yet another layer by doing this podcast together. How has the quarantine been so far?
Great, until you said that we were stuck here together.
No, I mean, truly, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. There's no one else in this world I would rather be stuck in quarantine with. I said it again.
Well, samesies.
Yeah, so the last time you were on the show was just about a year ago. We did a special episode then about My Comic Shop Country. At that point, I had just put out the trailer, and we had a little test screening of the first cut for some family and friends and cast and Kickstarter backers. So here we are a year later. One of the other things we mentioned in your last appearance was, at the time, you were pregnant with our son. Now he is 8 months old and sleeping in the next room, and hopefully he'll remain asleep while we record this, but we might have to take a break.
Yes, times they have changed since just a year ago.
Yes. Have you been enjoying parenthood so far? Big adjustment.
Yes. It is a challenge and a joy to be having this experience, but it's all better because it's with you.
Oh, well, that's very nice. You didn't have to say that, but I appreciate it. But
That's what was in the script.
Oh. No, but I feel the same. And, I mean, as far as being in this quarantine situation, yeah, it's been a lot. I mean, we hear some people, you see people on social media like, oh, I'm so bored. I'm trying to find things to do. Like it's been the opposite for us. I mean, we're both working remotely. So we still have our day jobs that we're working on, obviously doing stuff like this. And then, of course, taking care of an 8-month-old. Our days have been pretty full. Yes,
very robust and scheduled out. So, yes, boredom has not been an issue by any means. And we have not learned any new skills or trades or completed any masterpieces of art. I'll say any visual art.
Yes, these podcasts are art. But yeah, so it's definitely been an experience. We've been doing our best. And, on this note, of course, I just want to say, as I've been saying in these episodes, I hope everyone listening is staying safe and healthy and inside and sane. All of those things. I wish everyone the best. I will reiterate the plea that I've been making to everyone in all of these episodes. Support your local comic shop if you can. Reach out, see what sorts of services and deals they might be offering. I know anything at this point is appreciated. So I've been really looking forward to doing this episode because, for once, it's like I don't really have to generate the content. I put the call out on social media. I said, what questions do you have? Generally about My Comic Shop Country, but really I said I opened it to pretty much anything anyone wanted to ask. And we got a nice mix. A few people submitted multiple questions. This was primarily over Facebook, but we had, I think, one Instagram one as well. So I appreciate everyone who submitted a question. There were some really great questions in there. Like, I'm genuinely looking forward to doing this episode, and I'm happy to have you here. You're going to be throwing the questions out to me, and we'll have a little back and forth. So I guess, without any further ado, would you like to kick us off, Steph?
Sure. And it's my pleasure to do this. And I guess it's just convenient that it was your only choice by order of the governor.
That's true.
So let's start it off with our first question from Jeremy, who asks, what advice would you give to a first-time documentary maker?
Jeremy, a former customer of Alternate Realities. We've kept in touch over social media through these years. So that's a big question. That could be its own episode, or its own series as far as advice for a first-time documentary filmmaker. I guess the two things that immediately come to mind. One piece of advice. This is pretty standard. I think you would hear this, from anyone who's made a documentary. But it's good advice, and I think there's a reason why it's repeated so often. Shoot as much B-roll as possible. However much B-roll you think you need, I don't know, double it. That's something that I've learned through the years, and I'm proud to say, like with this current film, it's still, primarily, the style of the film is interview style. We have our talking heads, but I really made a conscious effort to shoot as much, footage of the stores and customer interactions, people shelving and going up to the register and things like that. It just breaks things up and makes things a little more visually dynamic, and it gives you, when you need to cut, during your interviews, it kind of gives you some coverage for that. So definitely shoot more B-roll than you think you need. And then the other thing is, because we're really reflecting on this, I would say to have as much of a roadmap for yourself as possible going into the production. Now, typically a documentary is not scripted in the traditional sense, and you do have to remain at least somewhat flexible, right? Because the story can change as you're in the process of filming. You might, encounter something that you never would have expected. During the editing process, things can shift again, and you might find a new focus or a new angle. So you have to be flexible. But I do think the more specific a roadmap you have going in, as far as, not just the topics you want to cover, but specific interview questions and even, some sort of shot list, or I think even more importantly than that, some sort of sense of how the puzzle pieces of your production are going to fit together. I think that makes for an easier time in the editing process. Like when I did my comic shop documentary in 2010, I made that entire film over one summer. Now, it was easy in the sense that I was only at primarily one location. That was 5 minutes from my house. So that made it very easy, as opposed to this film where we were across the country. But when it came to the editing process, I had a pretty specific outline that I was working off of, and that helped me move through the editing process faster. With this movie, I didn't. And so I think that made the editing process take a lot longer. And, I'm very happy with where we ended up. But again, it was a lengthy process. So I think the more of a roadmap you have going in, I think that definitely alleviates some of the burden when it comes to editing.
Great. I think that's all great advice, and I would concur, having been on this journey to an extent with you. I think this next question kind of speaks for itself, but Sean asks, what was it like to spend time with Sean Hendricks? Did he smell nice? He looks like he would smell nice.
Yes, the current owner of Fat Moose Comics and our good friend Sean Hendricks. I don't have any commentary on his scent. He doesn't. I would say neutral. I don't necessarily have any impression of his. It doesn't smell bad.
I would agree. I would say neutral, and I think in this circumstance it would be a good thing.
Yeah, right. Like if sitting next to him doing a podcast, or you're with him at the register at the store, if you smell cologne or something, right, that could be a little off-putting.
Yeah.
So, but as far as how it is spending time with him, generally a lot of fun. I mean, there's a reason why he's been on the podcast multiple times and plays as large of a role as he does in the documentary. So Sean's a lot of fun. Very much. I mean, this is true, I would say, with the vast majority of the people I've had, on the show and in the movie. But I think Sean in particular, what you see on screen and what you hear behind the mic, I mean, that's how he is in person. So,
yeah.
I think people who have been following this, I think you have a sense of his personality, and it's a lot of fun. And, I've been doing a number of interviews now for, to promote my comic shop country. And, I keep getting asked, like, which stores, not which stores are my favorite necessarily, but which stores, sort of were closest to the experience that I had at Alternate Realities. And, the two that I keep coming back to are Fat Moose, Sean's store, and Acme Comics in North Carolina. And that's not to discount any of the other stores. They all had something interesting to offer. But, Fat Moose in particular, like, really captured the vibe for me of Alternate Realities. And Acme has a very different atmosphere, but still that same sense of community. So that's kind of what I come back to with those two stores. And those two guys in particular, Sean at Fat Moose and Jermaine, a.k.a. Lord Retail at Acme Comics, I think it's fair to say those are the two guys who, of the people I met in the course of, the production of this, podcast and documentary, they've truly become, genuinely, like, we're friends, and we talk beyond these various projects. So great guys, and but yeah, nothing to offer on the scent part of that question.
I think you did answer.
I did.
Yeah, it says a lot. All right, so next question. Dan asks, how many days a week should I blast biceps?
Listen. So, for people who don't know where this question comes from, and the person asking it is Dan Pritchard from Australia. He does the music that you hear on the podcast, and he has a bunch of songs in the documentary as well. So what he's referring to, for anyone who's not familiar, especially if you're newer to the Flat Squirrel enterprise, I was profiled in the New York Times in 2011 when my first film, my comic shop documentary, played at San Diego Comic-Con. And it was tremendously exciting to be profiled in the Times. Really working hard to try to get back in there because it would really help a lot right now to get the word out about the movie, the new movie. But yeah, it was tremendously exciting to be in the New York Times. It's, I mean, to this day, the biggest press that I've ever gotten. And I remember being in the hotel room in San Diego when the article came out, and I was reading it on my phone. And the reporter, in describing me, she mentioned that I was, clean cut and that that I had robust biceps. So that's where this comes from. And I remember sitting in the room reading that, and I mean, look, ultimately it's a compliment and it's flattering, but it's, I don't know, it's a little goofy. And as I was reading it, I think one of the first things, it was unexpected, so it took me by surprise, but one of the first things I thought of was like, oh, I'm never going to hear the end of this. And various people through the years have had their fun with that. I will say, though, it's been good motivation, because there have been times where maybe I haven't wanted to go to the gym, but it's like, it's on the record, the certain description of me. So it's like, all right, I'll try to live up to that. But to answer Dan's question specifically, in my head, I work out like 4 days a week. Like, that's always the goal. And I think in my mind, it's like, well, that's my schedule, and I try to hit that. But I mean, realistically, I probably averaged twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. I was really in a good routine with the gym in our building prior to this quarantine situation. But I would say now I probably average 2, maybe 3 times a week. Usually do some bicep work in each workout, usually, but not every time. But if you're looking for a really good bicep workout, preacher curls. I mean, there are a bunch of different curls you can do, but preacher curls are far and away my favorite. They're very effective. I miss them very much right now since I don't have the equipment to do them. But also, don't neglect the triceps. It's not all about the bicep work. So there you go, Dan. I know you were just busting my chops, but I gave you a real answer.
And that's for physique reasons and for muscle health, to keep balanced and not
Yes.
pull a muscle and do some damage there. All right. So the next question, Jermaine, aka Lord Retail. What was the hardest thing to leave on the cutting room floor? Something you really wanted to be there, but time and flow just wouldn't allow for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We went to close to 20 stores, plus there were interviews with creators and collectors. There was the whole alternate realities piece of this. So there was a lot to fit into what was ultimately an 86-minute cut of my comic shop country. I would say, and you can tell me what you think, but I think as far as what I would call the action footage, like the customer interactions and things like that, there's not much that didn't make it in,
Right.
So as far as like the action stuff, I wouldn't say there was really anything that it's like, oh man, I really wish I could have gotten this in, but I couldn't. Like any humorous or interesting or revealing, interaction, something like that made it in there. Obviously, there was a tremendous amount of interview footage that couldn't make it in. If someone told a 2-minute anecdote, there's just no room for that really in a project like this. And, we had a lot of ground to cover, as far as explaining how comic shops work and what the challenges are and what retailers do and showing all of that. And then the whole back issue and collectability piece of this, there was a lot of ground to cover. So, yeah, I mean, there are definitely, large pieces of the interviews that couldn't make it in. But shameless plug, for people who want to see that kind of stuff, on my Patreon page, I've been posting clips. So you can get them either monthly, bi-weekly, or weekly, depending on your reward tier. So it's patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. So there's the deleted scenes have been there. But no, I guess a couple of things would come to mind as far as stuff that was like I worked hard to try to fit it in, right? And as for the rest of it, I think it's valuable content, but I can recognize as the editor, okay, this doesn't necessarily fit. It's not that I don't like it, but it's just that it doesn't necessarily fit. But I think 2 instances where I was bending over backwards and then realized, what are you doing? This is not working. One was the Jay Mizell sequence, which
Right.
I recently for anyone who hasn't seen it, I posted it though across social media. So if you follow me anywhere, you've seen it. But it's this 2-minute deleted sequence called Whatever Happened to Jay Mizell. And, for people who watched my second documentary film, By Spoon, that's all about Jay boxing up his life's work at the Empire State Flea Market in Port Chester when the market closed. And it ends with him moving everything to his garage and this idea that he's going to continue trying to sell his wares in his garage. And the last shot of the movie, like before the credits, is the garage door coming down. And I have this deleted sequence where we pick up with Jay now 5+ years later. Opening shot is the garage door coming up. So we pick up right from that movie. And, you see Jay, like, I guess you've had the opportunity to see the scene, so I'm not really spoiling anything. But you see that Jay, at least as of the filming, has held on to everything still for all those years. His customers, kind of left him high and dry. Very few of them continue to go to his garage. He expressed a lot of frustration about that. So it kind of it spoke to the whole idea of delinquent customers, which of course plays a role in the documentary. So it's this whole sequence, but I realized during the editing process, and this is where like I really had to have a conversation with myself and be like, does this serve a genuine purpose narratively, or is it really just that you love Jay and you wanted to have a little epilogue to one of your other movies in this? And I guess ultimately I felt that the whole idea of like holding on to your merchandise was already represented by Odo in my comic shop country and those warehouses. And then again, the whole idea of delinquent customers, we had plenty of other current retailers speaking about it. So I didn't feel like it was necessarily needed to further highlight those aspects, like they were already covered. And it just kind of felt like what I ultimately labeled it as when I posted it recently on social media, a detour. So that was one thing that, again, it was great to be able to film Jay one more time. And I like the sequence. And when I went to visit him, he's in an assisted living facility now. I showed it to him on my phone, and he really got a kick out of it. He genuinely seemed like he enjoyed it. So that I was happy to do that. And I kind of like that it's its own little thing now. And I think it serves as a nice little epilogue to By Spoon. So anyone who watches that documentary short, if you want to see like whatever happened to Jay Mizell, it's there. But so that was one thing. And the other, as you will recall, Steph, there was a lot of drama with Fat Moose Comics
Yes.
in the course of filming. Nothing to do with Sean or anything. And people who watched the extended Kickstarter cut of My Comic Shop Country, you saw this. It was in that cut, but not in the final version. So I won't go crazy in the description of this, but basically, Sean Hendricks is the current owner of Fat Moose, but at the time of filming, a gentleman named Matt was the owner. And there was a bit of a question as to whether I would be permitted to film an interview with Elon, the original owner of Fat Moose, at the Fat Moose store. That was the original plan, but then Matt decided that he didn't want me to film Elon in the store. There had been some tension there between them. And, it was Matt's store, so it was certainly his prerogative to say that. And I understand that, and that's fine. I think it made for somewhat of an awkward situation for Elon, for myself, and for Sean, who was sort of the intermediary in all of this. And it was just kind of an awkward situation, and logistically it posed some problems because I really did want to get Elon on camera. He's the original owner of the store. He's a retailer who's been doing this for decades. Even though he doesn't own Fat Moose anymore, he owns a store called Mighty Moose out in the Seattle area. And again, he was going to be in town just for this small window of time. And I ended up filming him in New Jersey, very close to Fat Moose, at a friend's house where he was staying. So, it all worked out and it was fine. But, it was kind of a lot of work to get to that point. And then I had each of them, I had Matt and I had Elon on screen, separately, each addressing the situation and the tension between them. And it did make it into that first cut, but ultimately I felt like it wasn't really necessary. There was a criticism that had been leveled against Elon that he wasn't really as engaged with the customers as he should have been towards the end of his tenure as owner of Fat Moose Comics. And
he admits
that. He admits that, and he explains it in his interview. So, it was fine. And so we had that little bit of back and forth, but, I guess initially I wanted it in the movie. To be honest, it was because it had been such a headache just to get the interview done that I felt like, well, I want to get something out of it, sort of thing. And then, drama behind the scenes at a comic shop is a thing. So I kind of wanted to have it in there because this can happen at stores. So I felt like it was true to life and I wanted to have it. And then again, this whole idea of like not being super welcoming to customers, that was something that I wanted to address in the movie. But we have in the doc Ariel Johnson of Amalgam Comics talking about the same idea of, in her experience, going into a store and the person behind the counter assuming that she's buying comics for her boyfriend, right? And I ultimately felt that was a more powerful and impactful encapsulation of this issue of not always being welcomed at a store, as opposed to like the whole fat moose back and forth sort of thing.
And as opposed to an owner of a shop saying, yeah, it wasn't always welcoming.
Yeah, like that's the thing. I mean, if he had fought it, I don't know, I might have left it in, but he was very, was gracious, and he accepted it and he admitted it, and that was fine. But it just got to the point where even for that first cut, like I'd spent so much time trying to boil it down to like 30 seconds. And then as I was making like my final edits and I really needed some time back, it just didn't stay in. But, the editing process is fascinating. And I guess one thing that I've learned, and going back to Jeremy's question, I guess one other piece of advice, sometimes like you'll bend over backwards trying to fit something in. And sometimes you need to take a step back and just say, well, do I really need this? Or if I take it out, does it flow better? And that was kind of what I found with that piece of it. But anyway, so those were two things that either, like in the case of Jay, I really wanted to have that in there. And in the case of the Fat Moose drama, I had spent so much time on it that like I didn't want that to have been for naught. But ultimately, both of those didn't make it in.
All right, the next question is from Oren, who asks which place had the best dollar bin selection.
Yeah, I actually had responded to him on social media, but I'll answer it here in the question in the podcast. It's so funny actually, because I think the two stores that probably had the largest dollar bin selection were the stores that don't really cater to the back issue collector market, right? Which would be Escape Pod and Challengers. I think those were because at Challengers, all their back issues are 99 cents, and at Escape Pod, like that whole room of back issues, I'm almost don't hold me to this, but I'm pretty sure like the vast majority of them are dollar books. Obviously, there were stores with larger back issue selections, but as far as dollar bins specifically, those were the two that stuck out. And again, I think it's just kind of interesting, like the stores that, specifically say in the movie, like we're, this, again, we don't cater to that particular market. But I think that, it goes hand in hand, right? Like they're not carrying slabbed CGC books, these rare vintage things. Like it's back issue fodder that they're just looking to move through quickly.
Right, because we know at Escape Pod, high-end back issues and pops, neither of those have worked in Menachem's experience.
Menachem, one of my favorite moments in the movie, where he's like, pops for however many years, and I never had the right ones.
That sums it up. All right, Phil had a few questions. His first one is, do you have any interesting stories, either from AR or one of the shops in the doc regarding artists or writers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Nothing that immediately comes to mind, and there's probably stuff that I'm just forgetting, I guess. But you know who has a lot of great stories about creators? Mark Hammond of All Yeah Comics.
He sure does.
He always has a story. If you mention a creator, he'll one-up you with a story about that creator or another one. So I would encourage, this was Phil, you said?
Yes.
Phil, check out the All Yeah Comics Facebook page. Mark does live videos pretty regularly now. Next time he does a live video, watch it, pop on there, and ask him to share a creator story. I all but guarantee he will have one for you.
And I would say, an interesting tidbit about artists and writers, the only place where we ran into two artists on the same day in Las Vegas at Alternate Realities in Las Vegas. Two artists happened to come in and you were able to interview them. So I don't know how interesting that is, but that was interesting and fun for us that day.
Yeah, for sure.
So second question, have you had contact with many of the shops in the doc and from your podcast post-corona? Interested in seeing how they're working through this?
So yes, it's interesting though, as far as maintaining contact with the stores that have been in the movie in particular. It's a mix. Like I said before, guys like Jermaine and Sean, we're in regular contact. And then others who, it's, less frequent and maybe a little bit more, business centered, I guess.
Or casual.
Yeah, a little more casual. And then other stores who never heard from again after the filming. I have reached out to all of the stores, in advance of the release. But yeah, some stores, just the contact hasn't been there. But I would say the majority of them I do, and I follow all of them on social media. So, and I've mentioned this in some of the previous episodes during this pandemic, but, shops are doing all sorts of things. And, and one of the things I'm proud of about the documentary is it shows you the challenges and it shows you the behind the scenes struggles of being a comics retailer. But the stores that are represented in the movie are all stores that are doing something interesting and innovative to try to stay relevant, right? Like in terms of the events and, again, like the whole back issue, that sub-market of, vintage back issues, diversifying their product line, the whole pop debate. So there are a lot of things, that you see in the documentary, different things that stores are doing. And you see that again now in light of everything that's going on. So stores are doing, curbside pickup. A lot of them are doing curbside pickup. I know a bunch of them are doing mail order. Like Acme's been shipping out stuff like crazy. Yeah, go ahead.
I have to give the shout out to Jermaine, who really stepped outside of his comfort zone and credits you with it, that inspiration to do it by hosting a home shopping network by Acme.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were
video.
I thought you were going to go somewhere else. I was going to say that just a shout out to Acme for they sent me a very nice little birthday care package recently, which was very nice. And I appreciate a couple of Superman themed books. But so they've been doing a lot of that. Torpedo Comics in Vegas, they've been doing a ton of Instagram live sales. So shops are doing all sorts of things to still be able to move product and, serve the needs of their customers. So I think that's, been one positive in a very difficult situation.
Right. It kind of forces you to think outside the box.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, third question from Phil. Listening to your podcast, I see there are definite patterns and pitfalls.
Before we started this, I said, you want to read through all the questions? You were like, no, I think I'm good.
Rewind. Listening to your podcast, I see there are definite patterns and pitfalls to opening a shop. Have you considered putting this info together in written form to help many new shop owners out? What many new shop owners? That's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, I know. And I think there's actually another question that kind of will get at that. Well, how do I say this and not sound like a jerk? No, to be honest. So I've heard from a number of people have reached out over the years, people who were either starting up a new store or were taking over an existing store and have said that they found the podcast to be a very helpful resource for them. And I love that. And that means a lot to me. I'm glad that the podcast can serve that purpose for that select group of people who are opening or taking over a store. So the podcast is out there. It's free. It always will be. So, it's always there for people who want to hear from other retailers and from people who want to, especially going back to the first season, listening to the downfall of alternate realities. I think there is a lot of good information to be gleaned from the podcast. And the documentary, I think, is a very good guide. I mean, maybe not so much about like opening a store, but as far as things that you can do to combat some of the challenges and to run a successful store, I think there's a lot of really great stuff in there. As far as me like actually sitting down to write a guide, no, and I don't, not to be so mercenary about this, but it's the sort of thing where I would really have to make a significant amount of time to do something like that, and it would need to be worthwhile for me to do so, and I don't really foresee a scenario where it would be. Now, would it be great if, say, Comics Pro or Diamond or one of the publishers or some entity said, hey, kid, you've talked to a lot of retailers, like you've been to a lot of stores, you've seen a lot of stuff. It sounds like you've gleaned a lot of insight. We would love to commission you to do something like this. That would be a conversation I'd be interested in having. But as far as me taking it upon myself to say, hey, I'm going to spend the next few months writing a how-to guide for retailers, and I don't foresee myself doing that. Also, I have gained a lot of insight, but at the same time, my expertise only goes so far. I don't have the firsthand experience of owning my own shop. So, I couldn't necessarily approach it from that perspective. But in terms of everything I've learned from talking to all of these retailers and seeing all of these stores, Like if I were opening my own store, I know how I would do it. But yeah, as far as me like taking the time to put together a guide like that, no. In a world of infinite time, yes, I would be happy to do that. But that's just not the situation that I find myself in. Also, it's so funny because, like with the documentary, when I was shopping it around, right, to the various distributors, obviously we ultimately found one that saw the potential in the movie. But, I think one of the things that I ran into was this idea that like, oh, it's too niche of an audience, right? Comics fans. And, it was sort of an uphill battle to try to say to people like, no, like, yes, comics fans are the natural target audience for this project, but it taps into some ideas that are really universal, like this, the idea of wanting to have meaningful face-to-face, right? Like that doesn't matter if it's a comic shop or a bookstore or a record store or whatever it is, like people can identify with that. But that was definitely sort of a hurdle that I had to overcome and sort of say like, no, like this can reach a wider audience. As I move forward with my creative endeavors, though, the idea isn't to get even more specific. Like with the comic shop documentary, it's like, okay, that's one audience. But now to like try to target specifically what I would imagine would be a very, very minuscule pool of people, of prospective comic shop retailers. No, like I said, that's just not, I don't have the time for that. And I don't think it would be worthwhile. But again, the podcast is there. I hope people continue to use it as a resource. And I don't know if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking about buying a store, opening a store, and they want to, I'm happy to talk to anybody.
So I think that's all great points to bring up based on this. So tying into that, the next question.
Oh, wait, I don't mean to cut you off, but let me throw that back to you. If I said, hey, all right, I know what I want to do next, my next creative project, I'm going to write a book. And it's going to be all about how to open a comic shop. What would you say?
I think that goes to your point. While I think it is an interesting subject and you certainly have the a wide breadth and depth of knowledge about it, it comes down to not that, okay, you should only write or do creative endeavors, for the audience or, for it to be seen or heard or watched. But yes, it would almost be like, it would just be an exercise in, just an exercise for a writing exercise as opposed to a broad audience. Again, especially in the current times where comic shops were struggling before coronavirus. Some are thriving, I'll say, but it's hard, it's challenging. It's the margins are so small that it takes a lot of work and a lot of dedication. And it's been said, many times, and I don't think, and no, none of the owners would take offense, I don't think, to this or would disagree. And I think they've all alluded to this of, you don't get into this for the money. So, post-corona, I don't know what that prospect will be, because we've talked, whether it is you actually opening a shop, that we've, joked about that, but, somewhat seriously discussed that prospect to an extent. But I think the same kind of applies in this post-corona world that we yet to know what it will bring. Yeah.
So Phil, I don't mean to poo-poo the idea. It's a lovely thought, but I just don't think it's for me. But again, if someone came a-calling and hired me to do this, then again, that would be a different story.
Every time you refer to that, it's like, are they calling you back in 1950 when they say, "Hey kid," or they come a-calling? You're gonna have a gentleman caller at the door.
They're paying, man. It's all right. I won't turn them away.
Segue. Now it's not segue anymore. But Aaron's question is, what are things people can do to ensure the survival of comic shops? And I assume that's in relation to the current global pandemic.
Oh, so a nice light question. Do you want to take this one, Steph?
Yeah, exactly. Just so for a lighthearted response, keeping things happy and upbeat and giving people a reprieve from what's going on. Well, hopefully by the time people hear this, maybe the situation will be a little bit more hopeful.
I don't know. This will be out. We're recording this late April. It'll be out May 6th. So I think we'll still more or less be in the current situation. But,
okay, I was trying to be positive, but
So this is a massive question. It's a great question, but this is a big question, and this is something that I certainly don't have all the answers. I think this would be its own podcast or mini series or something, because there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, a lot of this though, if you look at this My Comic Shop history as a whole, I think we get at a lot of these ideas in everything that we've done. But if I were to specifically try to answer this question, I think that, and even, yes, in the context of the current crisis, but even just speaking to the general challenges of comics retail, based on my experience as someone who worked at a store for many years and has now been to many stores and talked to many retailers, I think that there are things that can happen on multiple levels within the different categories of players in the industry. And then there's something really big and big picture. So as far as the more day-to-day stuff and the different levels that I was mentioning. So, and again, all of these things have been touched on in the various podcasts, but from the customer perspective, if you order something from your store, if you have a pull list, you should honor that. You pick up the books that you've ordered, pick up the statues,
or at least communicate.
Right? So that's definitely something. Delinquent customers, that's a major problem. You've heard that many times. So that's something that customers can do. I think greater communication between retailers and customers, and I think that's probably ultimately more on the retailer. But if the customer sort of wants to take this on, I think that's great. But the more communication in terms of gauging interest. And again, a lot of retailers already do this. You see, there's a whole sequence about it in the documentary. But, talking to customers to gauge interest. One of the biggest challenges for retailers is ordering comics, knowing how many to order. So having better intel from the regular clientele as far as, okay, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I'm not, I think that would help. So, at that level, I think a little more communication would be helpful. As far as things that retailers can do, again, I think all the things that you see in the documentary, those are all examples. And this is not to say that every store should do all of these things, right? Because each store has its own needs and its own audience. So, even when I talk about diversifying a product line, yes, generally speaking, I do think a store should be somewhat diversified. You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket with anything. But at the same time, would I say, oh, every store should carry Pops? No. If your audience has no interest in that, no, it would be foolish to do that. But as far as being as diversified as you can, so that if and when something like this happens and comics aren't being printed or shipped, you have something else that can kind of help you make it up a little bit. So I think there's that. Once you get to the distribution level, common complaints about Diamond, late books, or not late books, but missing books or damaged books. Those are things that Diamond always says that they're working on improving. Funny enough, they changed the type of box that they use recently, Diamond, and they said it was to help protect the book so they wouldn't get dinged up. We mentioned the care package I got from Acme, and it was in one of those new boxes. I don't really see how it would be an improvement.
Right? You said, look at these new boxes. You said something, or why? And and my simple response was, no, they're cheaper.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't know. They fold in a different way. I wouldn't be able to do an accurate description of how they're different, but I didn't look at it and think, oh, I see why this would protect the books. So I think at that level, there's that piece of it. Where you hear a lot of frustration from retailers, often has to do with the publishers. And again, this is all captured in the documentary, but one aspect of this is the qualitative nature and subjective nature of, this is art that we're dealing with here. So, Paul Levitz has a great line in the documentary where if you run a bake shop, the quality of what you sell is up to you. If you run a comic shop, the quality is up to other people. And it's subjective. It's not a widget that, okay, it's being made by someone else, but that it's meeting certain technical specifications, right? This is art, and people, stories and art might resonate with some customers and not with others, and you have no control over that. So that's one piece. I don't know that there's really any answer to that, but, late books, that's a common complaint. And imperfect information. I know retailers are, often express frustration over the fact that, not only do they have to order months in advance and, they don't always have an accurate sense of what their customers are looking for, but beyond that, they're basing their decisions on a couple of lines of description in previews. So the counter argument to that, though, is, publishers would probably counter and say, well, we can't tell retailers, we can't give away the spoilers and surprises to retailers because they might leak it. And that there might be a valid argument there. I don't know what the workaround would be. I don't know if there's some way that some sort of program that retailers can go through to demonstrate their trustworthiness to I don't know what the answer would be there. But I think that's the response you would get from a publisher if you were to request, hey, if there's going to be like a big story, like you need to let us know what it is so we know to order more. So again, I don't know that there's necessarily an answer to that. And then again, the lack of returnability, that's another thing that's really big. So if publishers were able to offer more in that sense, that might alleviate some of the burden.
But then the cost would be higher.
Right. So exactly. So there's the trade-off there. So, I mean, I guess that's a long way of saying but there are these different levels, right? Going from customer to retailer to distributor to publisher, there are these different levels and there are frustrations and challenges at each level. And I think there are things that can be done by each player within each level that could potentially make for a more thriving business. But I think all of the challenges that I just rattled off, I think they can accumulate and snowball, and they can be store killers in certain instances if all of these things are happening, right? Like if books are, coming out late and they're not very good and your ordering is off because you don't know what customers are going to want, and then the customers don't pick up the books, and books are damaged, right? Like if all these things are happening, it's super hard. But I think that if you really want to talk about stores not only surviving but actually thriving, I think it's growth. You need growth beyond, the existing base. And I don't know that it's necessarily something that individual shops can accomplish, nor do I think it's something that should be on them to accomplish, right? So like in my comic shop country, we have a lovely sequence where Mark Hammond from All Yeah Comics goes and sets up at Alamo Drafthouse, the local movie theater, right? And tries to get people as they're going into the new Avengers movie. And he says in the movie, like, they've picked up some new customers that way. And so that's great. Like, that's a great example of a store taking the initiative and saying, hey, all these people go to the movies. Let me see if I can get some crossover here.
Right.
But
it's about closing that gap between whatever is causing it or what the reason is, but closing that gap that clearly exists between comic book readers and comic book movie / TV show fans. And I'm not trying to throw shade or getting on a soapbox here by any means, but I think it is. But, and who's to say I don't know what the answer to that is, but, if one of the Chris's, because they're typically listening to the podcast. So if you're listening to this episode, just make sure. I mean,
like Evans, Pratt. Yeah,
exactly.
Of course.
I know they're avid listeners. So if they happen to be listening to this particular episode, do a signing at a store one day. I mean, or put, tweet or Insta or Facebook live about, the importance of the source material that maybe doesn't quite get credited in the way it should be.
And that's exactly, that's what I was getting at with this, where it's like, again, you look at a Mark Hammond setting up at a theater, and again, that's great. But I think, again, if you really want to talk about major growth, I think there needs to be a large-scale awareness campaign. And I think that's something that really only can be undertaken by, the parent companies.
Someone with an audience.
Yeah,
an existing audience.
Yeah, it's one thing, for Marvel Comics or DC Comics or the individual shops, but if Marvel Studios and Disney and Warner Brothers and AT&T,
Don't ever speak ill of Disney.
Yes, that's a whole other. Steph is a massive Disney fan. I am less enthused by Disney. It's just not for me. But that's the thing. If the movie divisions and if the parent companies were to undertake something like this, I think that could help move the needle. And if you captured even just a small percentage of the people who are going to the movies and people who are watching the shows and got them thinking about like, oh, there are comics out there. And even if they started with a digital comic and then maybe wanted to learn more, wanted actual personalized recommendations, not just what a logarithm suggests that they'll like, that hopefully that would get them into a store. But to your point, the actors are, I've always felt this way. It's like, at the end of the movies, like, yes, those post-credit scenes, they're a lot of fun. I look forward to them,
Most of the time.
most of the time. Sometimes they're not quite worth the wait, but it's like, I don't know, what if once at the end of one of the movies, instead of like an actual scene, it was one of the Chris's being like, hey, did you like this movie you just saw? Well, guess what? It has its origins in the pages of a comic book, and you can get them and maybe, in each local market, they have a list of nearby stores. It's like, maybe something like that would help. Now, I guess this is the lawyer in me that I always want to give the counter argument. It's like from those companies' perspectives, not to be cold about this, but they might counter with, well, like what, like what's really in it for them necessarily? And, to your point, maybe it's enough to show gratitude for where these stories come. I mean, like billions of dollars are being made off of, these characters and ideas and concepts that come from comic books. So shining a light on the comics, shouldn't need to be a hard sell to these companies. But I don't know. Perhaps it is.
And I think it's synergistic. I mean, why not give fans, there's only, one Guardians movie every X number of years. They could be reading comics all year long. To an extent, so when there isn't other material being released as frequently.
So that was, I think hopefully as full an answer as I can give on that question. But I really do think it comes down to a large scale awareness campaign. And again, it's not that comic shops can't do that, but their reach only goes so far. Their resources, will only get them so far. I think that needs to come from somewhere else. And I don't think it's inappropriate to think, or to at least have one of these companies entertain it. One other aspect to this, though, where potentially I've been thinking about this a lot, like with digital comics, and regular listeners will know I am a proponent of digital comics, especially, we've had very limited space now. We've been in a one-bedroom apartment, for a while. And now, of course, we have our son. And so space is really, really tight. And, that's one of the reasons why, again, always my heart is always with the comic shops. I would always advocate going to your local comic shop. I continue going to stores, but I do also like the digital reading experience. But one thing that's interesting about digital comics, and I know you've heard me, go on about this, is that, Marvel and DC, right, they have their subscription services a la Netflix or Hulu where, you pay a flat rate and you can read as many comics as you want. The newest comics are not there. With Marvel, you have to wait 6 months before new comics are added. For DC, it's a year. And if you want to read the newest Marvel and DC comics, you can buy them individually on Comixology for the same cover price as the print version. So this is an interesting aspect to this because for as much as we can beat up on publishers, and I gave a number of instances just a few minutes ago of how publishers, could potentially do a better job, I do think that this might be an instance where publishers are deferring to comic shops. And I think the reason why you see the same price point for digital comics, the same price point, for digital as print, is not to undermine the retailers and to avoid, what I'm sure would be massive retailer pushback. If, for example, you could buy the newest comic at 99 cents, for example, right? Like I know for me, like that's definitely, like I don't think I've ever bought like a new comic digitally. And one of the reasons is it's like, yeah, if I'm going to pay the same amount of money, why would I get a digital version where I don't have anything to show, I don't have anything tangible. And part of that is the collector mentality, but part of it is also like just ideologically, it's like their cost to make this product digitally is vastly lower. Like they're not, yes, they're paying the talent, but they're not, there's no shipping costs, there's no printing costs. So it frustrates me that, the price point would be the same. But again, I do think it's an instance where, publishers are deferring to comic shops. Maybe there's another reason to it that I'm ignorant of. But maybe there's a way to leverage digital comics in such a way that you're able to access the people who currently wouldn't even think of going to a comic shop, expose them to comics, and then, again, you need the next level of getting them from the digital into a store. And again, I don't know what the solution to any of this would be, but I just wonder if, I just feel like as long as the digital price point remains the same, I feel like there will always be sort of a limit to how many new people you're going to reach. And I don't know, maybe there's just some way to leverage digital to attract a new reader and then to funnel them into a store. I don't know if you remember when we interviewed Wade for the documentary, Mark Wade, which was a great interview, and a bunch of his sound bites made it in. There was one piece that didn't, but that I kind of tucked away because I thought it was an interesting idea. He was of the opinion that, with digital comics, that, if you can get people at least initially to read digitally, ultimately they will make their way to a store. And he sort of equated it to iTunes, for example. Like, if you didn't know what music was, in this hypothetical example, right? If you had no exposure to music before and you went into the iTunes store, where would you begin, right? Same sort of thing. Like, if you've never had any exposure to comics and, you're in comiXology or something, it would be so daunting. Like, you in theory would want that, again, that face-to-face and, the ability to have a conversation with someone, tell them your taste, have them steer you, point you in the right direction. So I don't know. I guess I wonder if there's some way where, digital comics could kind of be used in that way. Again, there's a lot of ifs and a lot of questions, and I don't have solutions, but those are things that I kind of wonder about.
Then I think it's kind of a paradox if you're saying that digital comics can be an entry point, but that entry point is too daunting for someone who has no background knowledge.
I mean, I guess it's sort of like I get what you're saying, but I guess it's sort of like if you can get someone to read like a comic digitally, but then they want to go beyond that and they want to, find out what else they would like. That's where more of the store would come into play.
Yes, like at first blush, it seems like it would work, but how are they going to find the comic that they like that's going to make them want to read the next one? So just to play devil's advocate, that it's a more challenging prospect than simply getting them to go online and read a comic to get them hooked.
True. No, I mean, I don't disagree, and actually, I'm glad we continue this line, because I guess one other thing that I see as a roadblock with just comics generally, whether it's digital or physical, because I think this is something that we're running into with the documentary, right, where you can rent it for like $3.99 on Amazon or iTunes, or buy it for like $9.99, right, And we've done well so far. Like, the distributor was very pleased with our initial launch, and this was really nice. We had proportionately, typically the rentals outnumber the purchases, but we had like a surprisingly high number of people buying the movie instead of renting it, which was great. Right. So to everyone who has done that, I appreciate it very much. But so again, I think we had a solid launch. Obviously, you always want the numbers to be higher. And I can't help but think that, one potential roadblock is if you're a viewer and you have the option, like if you have a Netflix and a Hulu subscription, right? You pay a flat rate and you can watch as much as you want on those platforms. And you're sitting down at night and you're deciding what to watch. And it's either watching something for quote unquote free because you have your subscription on Netflix or Hulu, or paying $3.90, even though $3.99 is not a huge sum, but it's still something, and it's still another step that you have to take to watch My Comic Shop Country. I don't know. I wonder if that's perhaps holding some people back. And same thing with comics, right? Like, it's probably not the easiest sell for someone who has no experience with comics to be like, hey, do you want to read comics? They're $3.99 each. Again, I feel like people now have this mindset of these subscription models. So I wonder if that is a potential roadblock as well.
Right. Well, and I guess as a tributary of that, there is just so much other content out there that if they're not accustomed to reading comics to begin with, then if they would actually seek it out.
Yeah.
So the next question is from James. What shops have declined to be interviewed for the podcast?
None. Unless I'm forgetting. None. No store has outright said, no, I'm not interested. There have been a couple stores that I just never heard back from. And I mentioned this on the show before, like when we went out to Palm Desert a few years ago for season 3 of the podcast, there were 3 stores in the Palm Desert, Palm Springs area. And I reached out to all 3, and 2 got back to me and were on the show. And the other one I just never heard from. And I'm trying to think. I don't know of any others that outright didn't respond. There have been a few where like they expressed interest and we went back and forth like trying to schedule it, and then I just stopped hearing from them. So there were a few instances like that. Like I tried to get JHU, Jim Hanley's or
Right.
it was formerly known as Jim Hanley's Universe. Now it's just JHU. I tried to get them on the show, and I'm friends with the guys on Facebook, and they seem really nice and everything. It just scheduling didn't work out. So there have been a few instances like that, but no one who's outright refused. I think for the most part, they see it as a positive. I mean, it's
Right.
and look, the show doesn't have the largest reach in the world, but we have our audience, and it's a way to get the word out about their store. So I think they see it as a positive. I think, maybe earlier on they didn't know as much of what the show's been about, but now the show's been out for a few years, and we've gotten some nice press and Newsarama and Comics Beat. So I think the show has enough behind it where someone would say, okay, this is going to be a positive thing. And it's funny because they're, at least in the instance of Midtown Comics is definitely one example, but a number of other stores as well. Like their reach on social media dwarfs mine. So there have definitely been instances where I think I'm benefiting more, just in terms of reach than they are. But I think all of them see it, as something worthwhile, or at least I hope so. And I hope that's one of the reasons why they've done it.
Right. And even Midtown Comics did agree and
Exactly.
came to fruition.
Actually, before we get to the next question, I want to take a moment here and give some shout outs to our sponsors, the folks that help us produce this show. So first up, we have The Hive Comics and Games, an oasis of nerd fun and events in the heart of Odessa, Texas. Whether it's comic book superhero stories or role-playing in a dungeon, The Hive is where to be. Come face off against the top Magic the Gathering players in West Texas. The Hive carries a majority of new comic titles each Wednesday and has all of your favorite titles in their back issue section. Follow them on Facebook at The Hive Comics and on Instagram at The Hive Comic Shop. I just want to mention, obviously, we are dealing with this current pandemic. I do follow The Hive on social media. And funny enough, going back to our earlier discussion, the current owner of the store, he was one of those people who reached out and said that the podcast was helpful as he was preparing to take over the store. So we wish him and The Hive, continued success, especially as they're navigating this current situation. I checked on what they're doing, and you can order through their website, and they do have curbside pickup. So I do encourage folks, especially if you're in the Texas area, please check out The Hive, especially during this incredibly challenging time. We also have our family of film festivals, and I don't know that I've ever told this story. So I'll do the commercial in a second, but sort of our liaison to these festivals, Steph, is a gentleman, a former customer of Alternate Realities named Steve Rogers.
Right.
Who, of course, that's the same name as Captain America. And I don't know if you remember, but when By Spoon, the Jay Mizell story, played at the Hang On to Your Shorts Film Festival in Asbury Park, we had some time to kill during the day, and we went over to Red Bank to Jay and Silent Bob's Secret Stash. And Steve, in addition to being connected to the festivals, was also friendly with one of the guys at the Stash. And he recommended that I bring, I think this was when I don't know if I was doing the Kickstarter. I don't know if this was pre or post Kickstarter, but I had postcards. And he suggested that I bring some to give to this guy at the Stash. He wasn't there when I went, but I went up to the person at the counter and I said, "Oh, Steve Rogers told me to give this to this other guy," and he had the expression that you would typically. I'm like, I wasn't shocked, and I had to quickly say, like, "Well, not that Steve Rogers, the real Steve Rogers." Do you remember this?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very awkward, but we thank Steve for again being our liaison with these festivals. So it's a family of film festivals: the Brightside Tavern Film Festival in Jersey City, New Jersey, this August. The Hang On to Your Shorts Film Festival, of course, in Asbury Park in September, and the Point Lookout Film Festival on Long Island this November. So you can get tickets for these events at brownpapertickets.com, and if you're a filmmaker, you can submit your work via Film Freeway. So again, all these events are still months away, so we hope that they can all proceed as planned and that people can enjoy them. We also want to say, be sure to listen to the official Hang On to Your Shorts podcast via a shared universe podcast network. And the organizer of these festivals, Chris Cullen, he has a new show out. It's called Cullen on Film. And actually, one of the earliest episodes, he had Ashley Williams, who, among other things, played Victoria on How I Met Your Mother. He interviewed her. So that's a cool thing. So you can check that out. All right. So we want to thank our sponsors. And I guess we'll get back into our questions.
All right, so the next few questions are from Joe. The first one is, do you wish you could have gone to more comic shops? Also, do you think you will do a sequel?
Joe, did I not go to enough comic shops for you? My goodness, 20 stores.
People can't get enough.
So, no, I was really thinking about this, and it's funny, Steph, I don't know if we ever even talked about this. This might have just been like in my notes, but the earliest incarnation of my comic shop country, like when I just had like a legal pad and I was sketching out ideas. The earliest incarnation of this, I was thinking like 4 stores. Like I was thinking a very small number of stores in different parts of the country, and that I would just tell the story that way. And I'll be honest, I think there's a version of this movie that could exist that just uses a handful of stores and still tells a story effectively. Mm-hmm. But especially as I was thinking about the Kickstarter and the eventual movie, I felt that there was an element of spectacle that would be attractive to backers and ultimately to viewers if we had a larger number of stores. And then also, where we are in the tri-state area here, like in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, like there are plenty of stores that are easily drivable. So it's like, well, okay, I was easily able to like rack up the number of stores without putting too much of a burden on us or the production. So, again, for those couple of reasons, I quickly, the number of stores escalated, but, the earliest version was a very small number. And as far as like, do I wish I could have gone to more? No. I mean, I think the law of diminishing returns kind of comes into play here. Like at a certain point, I don't know how much value yet another store would add. And that's not to say that I have no interest in other stores, and like there are definitely stores like, Mile High Comics is a great example in Colorado. Like this massive operation. Like, yeah, that would be cool to go to and see.
I think these stores told this story. If there was another story, or if it were to be a just survey of more stores, then that's another story.
Yeah, exactly. But I think just adding more for the sake of the number, I think the narrative starts to crumble at that point. I'm happy that, there are a couple stores in the documentary that are their appearances are a little bit more fleeting, but the majority of the vast majority of the stores in the documentary, they might feel otherwise. I don't know if they were like, they filmed here for hours and I'm only in it for a few minutes. But I from my perspective, I feel that the vast majority of stores that we filmed, they get a fair amount of play, like whether even if it's more of like a moment or a sequence, but like they carry the ball for at least some portion of the movie and, really speak to, something that we're trying to illustrate. And then there are stores where obviously we spent a lot of time and they got even more play. But, I'm very comfortable with the number of stores. I definitely wouldn't have added. No.
Although there was one store, unfortunately, that we did film at that didn't make it. In Chicago.
Yeah. Do you know that I mentioned that when we recorded our podcast special a year ago, I brought this up and then you told me you shouldn't mention that, you should take it out. So I took it out. Now you brought it up. You feel like enough time has passed where it's okay to mention it now.
Yes.
Yes. No, it's First Aid Comics and I would recommend the store, and they've been on the podcast and they were wonderful. Their whole shtick is they wear lab coats, like they're doctors prescribing comics.
Yeah. It was a great crew there.
Yeah, and the owner is James, a wonderful person. I mean, it's a great story. It just, to be honest, some of the footage didn't come out quite right, and that's on me. And then again, it was just a matter of just the time. There's only so much real estate in the movie, so that was one store that we filmed at that didn't make it in. And then we also filmed at West Village Comics in the city, which subsequently closed. They were only in the movie a little bit in the initial cut. And the store closed, and it just became the sort of thing where I felt like I don't know. I guess I could have just left it in as it was, but from my perspective, I felt that if I left in that store, I would have to acknowledge the fact that they closed. And, especially as we're, towards the end of the documentary and we're summing up and everyone's talking about how much it meant to them, I just felt like that might kind of undermine what we were going for at the end of the movie. And again, only a little bit had made it in anyway. But both retailers associated with those stores were super understanding, and I appreciate that very much. Yeah. Oh, and then a sequel. What do you think? Do you think I would or should do a sequel?
I think it would. Again, it would have to be a different. I don't know that it would necessarily be a sequel per se, unless unless there was some development with a particular store or in this industry generally that was a story that needed to be told.
I would agree with that. I mean, I guess there are a couple of components to this. This goes back to what I was saying before about like writing the book for prospective retailers. Again, if, some platform came to me and said, hey, we saw the movie, like we want you to do more, and I were commissioned to do this, that would be one thing. Even then, though, I think it would really have to be like, well, all right, what's the angle? Because if it's just me doing the same thing but with more stores, I don't know that I'm necessarily interested enough to do that. But either way, like, is it something that I would self-start like I did with this one? No, for a couple of reasons. But I guess at the heart of it is I'm incredibly proud, and I felt that I said what I needed to say on the subject of comic shops. And I think again, it's self-serving of me to say, but I think it's a strong product and a strong film. And to sort of just do a sequel where I go to more stores, I don't see that necessarily being the path. I guess if again, I were approached to do this, and or if some development occurred, and I mean, sad to say, I mean it could, depending on what the landscape of comic shops looks like after the current pandemic, then it's something that I would entertain. But do you remember initially the idea that I had after this project was to do an international version? Do you remember this?
Right. Yeah. Yes.
And I think pretty early on into making this one, I was like, that would be like, it was hard enough. It was hard enough schlepping the equipment, especially when we were flying, and then adding the international component. I just felt like this would be way too demanding. But I had the idea that I had the original ending that I had in mind for my comic shop country. You and I, you've been to Italy. I've never been. But we were, at some point we will go, but there was a period of time where we were thinking about a trip. Like, we didn't get so far as to actually plan it.
Right.
But we were thinking about it. And the idea that I had would be like the last shot of my comic shop country would be like you filming me in Italy, like walking into an Italian comic shop. And the voiceover would have said, like, I've explored America, but there's a whole world out there. And that kind of would have led into the next thing. So that was a very, very early idea. But again, just from a production standpoint, especially to do that independently is just, I think, too much. So.
Joe's next question is, what's your least favorite comic story or comic film of the last 20 years?
Yeah, and there's a question. So I think they go together, right? Because there's what's my favorite and least favorite, right?
The sub-question is from Justin. That's what's your personal favorite comic story or book, film, over the last 20 years?
I know. I was really thinking about this pair of questions. I was really thinking about. I was like, what? I mean, favorite and least favorite. Least favorite's kind of hard because I don't. It's funny. Like, even when we do book club episodes and stuff, like, I always pick stuff I like. I mean, and we discuss them in an analytical way. It's not just us gushing about it for an hour. But like, I've never picked a book club selection for the podcast of something I didn't like, because it's like, well, I don't want to sit there for an hour and bash it. Like, that's not what I want to put out there. So I think I'm a little reluctant to answer the least favorite, but I like to keep it real with our listeners, so I will. But first, I'm very curious to ask you. I mean, again, I know your comics reading has been very limited, but as far as the movies, do you have a favorite and least favorite of the last 20 years, which is basically this whole modern era of superhero movies?
I mean, we always have our post-movie discussions and critiques. I mean, I don't know. It might be. I mean, unfortunately, like, the least favorite might be.
You can say it. It's okay.
I mean, it might be Suicide Squad, although that had some redeeming qualities, but just the way that it came together, the end result wasn't, what the most, what I'm looking for is the most interesting and most compelling story, the way it was put together. Not to say that some of the performances, many of the performances were excellent. So there's that. Favorites is hard. I don't know. Were there any movies. I don't know that it was a comic movie over the past year where we came out saying we didn't really have any negative critiques of it, but I feel like it probably was not a comic movie.
I mean, Endgame, I felt like we were very pleased with that.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
But so you don't have a pick for like again, of the past 20 years, like a favorite?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just been so long since we've even discussed films because we've just been in the bubble of our 1-bedroom apartment.
Sure.
That I'm blanking on what there even would be to choose from.
Well, let that marinate for a bit. So let me say this. I'll answer the question specifically, but as far as like generally what my tastes are, I've enjoyed really, I would say virtually all of the Marvel Studios movies. Like I enjoy them.
Right. Same here.
You know, I agree. I think with the majority of critics and fans, like Thor: The Dark World was probably their weakest one. But even that, it's watchable. It's nothing horrible. I tend to like the Cap movies better than the others. And I think Incredible Hulk was underrated. I felt like that was better than it gets credit for. And I think Endgame was astounding. I mean, I really just think that what they were able to accomplish in terms of the world building, you know, creating the shared cinematic universe, all the build up, the payoffs, you know, as a fan, it checked off every box. Like it was emotional. Like I enjoyed it a lot. But like at the same time with these Marvel movies, while I enjoy them and I'm entertained for the 2+ hours, which is really all they need to do, I don't find that they usually stay with me after. Like they don't really resonate with me to the extent where it's like I'm thinking about them days after. Very rarely. So I don't know that I would say like any of the Marvel Studios movies are like my favorite. You know, when you get to the non-Marvel Studios movies based on Marvel characters, you know, things like the X-Men franchise is all over the place. Movies that were great, movies that were terrible, and movies that were somewhere in between. I want to circle back to Spider-Man. And then on the DC side, I mean, you know, regular listeners know that I am a Zack Snyder defender. At the same time, though, I wouldn't say that Man of Steel or BVS are my favorite of the last 20 years. I certainly understand the criticisms that have been leveled against them, and I share some of them. I can say I think the movie I was most disappointed by, and this is not to say that I think it's qualitatively the worst of the last 20 years, but the movie I was most disappointed by in terms of my expectations versus the reality, Superman Returns. I mean, I was so I can't tell you how excited I was for this movie. Like the first Superman movie that I got to see on the big screen, they were using, you know, a lot of the original score. They were repurposing this old Marlon Brando footage as Jor-El. Like, they cast an actor who was like Christopher Reeve, you know, in the second. And we do love our Brandon Routh. I know you do as well. But I was so excited going in and so disappointed with the movie that we got. So like that, the disappointment level on that one was very high for me. But again, still, I wouldn't say that was the worst, but just in terms of, you know, my expectations versus the reality, that one was up there. The last movie you and I saw in theaters was Birds of Prey.
Right.
And not my least favorite of the last 20 years, certainly. It was enjoyable, but the fact that, and we could debate the merits of Rotten Tomatoes, but the fact that its rating was so much higher than Batman v Superman really irked me because I just don't get it. It doesn't seem right to me. It was like at 76% and BVS was at like 26%. It just feels wrong to me. I don't think that's an accurate representation of the quality of those two movies. So again, not my least favorite, but it's just something that I had. And again, like it was fine. I'm not saying like, oh, it was a terrible movie, but I just don't think, you know, at least as far as the ratings, that it deserved to be that much higher.
What if someone said that would be reflective of a hint of sexism?
I would reject that. It's not, it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a female-led movie. I think that's great. You know, I wish it had been better. I mean, like I love Captain Marvel, you know, and I thought that, well, not to get on too much of a tangent here, but you know my feelings on Rotten Tomatoes. I generally feel that they're too extreme. I don't know. I feel like the Marvel movies in particular usually sit at like 90 something percent, and it's like, are they that good? I don't know about that. And then again, a movie like Batman v Superman that was rated so low. It's like, come on, it wasn't that bad. I know people will argue with me on that, but I just feel like the ratings are sometimes a little bit too extreme for my taste.
And maybe with quote unquote comic book movies, the lens that they're being looked at is a little bit different than what a movie as a piece of art would be, how it would be considered. I guess I'm just thinking about the question overall, like it's even debatable whether this would be a quote unquote comic book movie. But something like Rogue One, where it was, and we're not even huge Star Wars fans, let's say. But just as a movie and the way it was done, the acting, and the way it was put together, was just beautifully done. So I don't know if that sits at the top of, a movie that I think was one of the best, but again, I don't know if they're looking for a what superhero movie was my favorite. I mean, I would say maybe Wonder Woman sits at the top of my list as well.
Okay, yeah, that was
if
definitely,
we wanted to go traditional.
That was definitely a great one. I would say, because I really thought about this a lot over the last couple of days. Spider-Man 2, the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 2 is my favorite comic book movie of the last 20 years. And it's been a few years now since I've watched it, but I watched it recently enough. I mean, it hasn't been, 18, when I forget exactly the year it came out, but it hasn't been that long. I've watched it within at least the past few years. And, there's just something about it that has always resonated with me. I mean, it's definitely the best of the series. I think it overcame sort of the growing pains of the first movie, and it didn't run into the issues that the third one did, where that one really just fell apart. So it's definitely the best of the series, but I think it just, it had a compelling villain with redeeming qualities, and I think it really captured the inner conflict of Peter Parker wrestling with, this responsibility and the life he really wants to lead with Mary Jane. I just really think it captured that well. And there was just stuff going on thematically in that movie that I just always responded to. So, I think I have to go Spider-Man 2 as my favorite.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then least favorite, like the Josh Trank Fantastic Four, right, that was rough. Some of the X-Men movies, I guess one of those would be my least favorite. Funny enough, though, now
that you mentioned X-Men, though, maybe Wolverine is up there for me as well.
That you like.
Yes, it's up there.
Origins? Yeah, you liked Origins.
Yeah.
I don't know. It has its defenders. And again, look, you like what you like. I mean, movies that I just defended a moment ago, people are like, what is he talking about? So, you like what you like. Funny enough, though, I always hold up Green Lantern and the prior Fantastic Four movies as examples of, they're definitely not good or definitely not great, but I don't think they're as bad as they are often made out to be. I feel like they were almost there. They missed the mark. They definitely missed the mark, but I don't feel like they were so far off. I think they could have gotten there with a little bit more finesse and fine tuning. And then comic stories. My favorite, DC: The New Frontier. This is not a very outside the box choice, but it's been my favorite for a long time. I suspect it will continue to be. I think it's, as a DC fan or just a comics fan in general, I think it's such a wonderful story. And we did a book club podcast about it a few years ago. If anyone hasn't read it, I highly recommend it. And then least favorite story. At first I was like, I don't know if I can even answer this because I don't know that anything really comes to mind. And then today I was like, no, you know what? There were two Spider-Man stories. This is now going back a good 10 years at least, but during the J. Michael Straczynski run on Amazing Spider-Man, and comics fans will know exactly what I'm talking about, but one was Sins Past, where, spoiler alert, it was revealed that Gwen Stacy, Peter Parker's first true love, had an affair with Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, and became pregnant with his twins. It was oh my God. It was, one of those stories where it just felt wrong. It just felt wrong. And then at the end of Straczynski's run, there was the One More Day storyline where the story undid Peter's marriage to Mary Jane. And the way this is done is Peter Peter's Aunt May has been shot and she's dying and she's not going to make it. And so Peter makes a deal with Mephisto, basically the Marvel Universe's version of the devil, to save Aunt May's life. He sacrifices his marriage. So he and Mary Jane have never been married. And again, I mean, there was a tremendous amount of backlash at the time, which I shared. shared in. And it's funny because, like, you know, this came out, you know, years before you and I even met. Now, even more so now, I think I would be enraged reading it, because it's like, you know, to give up your marriage. And it's like, yes, it was to save the life of his aunt, who had been, you know, a surrogate mother to him. But this was also a woman who was incredibly elderly and frail. And I don't know, giving up, I don't know. It just could never reconcile that, you know. And I don't think it was really meant to be reconciled, because it was editorially driven. Marvel wanted a single Peter Parker back. So this wasn't necessarily like an organic story. It was Marvel saying, hey, he has to be single. Figure out a way to do it. So those two would be my least favorite.
Any other comments on favorite or least favorite works?
No, I think that
covers everything.
Yeah, I think that covers it.
Next question is, if you could write a comic about the stories you've heard, who would you get to draw it?
You know who my favorite artist is? Evan Doc Shaner. Beautiful. And he did a cover of, there was a Flash miniseries recently featuring Wally West, the Wally West version. And it was this cover that represented all of the different incarnations of Wally West. And it was so striking, so striking. And he just had such a simple, clean style. I love it. So yeah, we'll go with Doc Shaner.
I think I would go with a group effort by V. Ken Marion, Greg Schiegel, and the one and only Chris Geruso.
That's true. Yes, I I debated how to answer that one, because yes, they are our friends, and I love their work, and I would be very happy with any of them. But I went in a different direction. But thank you for making sure they were represented as well.
I didn't miss anyone. I didn't
want to play.
Right?
I don't want to pander, play favorites. So I tried to give a different answer.
No, but I think they could all capture the essence of the stories that you would be trying to tell.
Yeah,
and they literally have.
And they've all done.
Oh no, I did forget one though.
Nick Justice.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
So
all of those guys have
done
done beautiful work for me. I mean, so Nick's art you saw in My Comic Shop Country. Greg did the art. He did some of the art in my third documentary, Wacky Man, and he also just did the key art for my new Superman podcast, which was just amazing. And V. Ken did a sketch.
Amazing because it was mostly pictures of you.
Yeah, it was my favorite part. And Ken did a gorgeous Wonder Woman sketch as a Kickstarter reward. And Chris has drawn a couple of things for me. He did the Desi West Side Lord Retail team up sketch a while back. And then most recently he did the key art for our Homecoming miniseries, the sadly short-lived Homecoming.
Well, not short-lived, but maybe will be revived at some point. But actually, most recently, he did a fully customized piece of artwork for your birthday.
Yes, you...
With a touch of humor that only Chris can provide.
Yes, but well, on that note, you gave me, we mentioned the care package that Jermaine sent. You gave me really one of the best presents I've ever received. Obviously we're in quarantine here, couldn't go out and celebrate my birthday the way we typically would. Typically we'd go to a movie, we would do our steak dinner, like it would be a whole thing. We had tickets to a Broadway play that we weren't able to go to, obviously. But you solicited video and photo messages from people from like all corners of my life, and you put them together in this slideshow. And there was art from people like Greg and Chris, and they were very humorous. But it was one of my favorite presents I've ever received. It's the closest I've ever felt to George Bailey at the end of It's a Wonderful Life. Like everybody comes forward, and it was I didn't know who was coming up next. It was great, but it's people from alternate realities and people from all these other stores I've met along the way, people from work, people from college, like, our family, other, mutual friends of ours. It was such a good, I thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome. It was the least I could do to help celebrate and bring the world a little closer when we can't be out in it. So the next question from Joe. What's the worst comic shop you've ever been to? Not necessarily for the podcast.
Yeah, no, I thought about how to answer this one too. I guess, well, to be honest, there's no one store that like jumps out at me. It's like, oh, that's the one I would say. So we'll start from there. I'll say,
Just to interject, I mean, it's not as if we walked into a store and were met with, don't touch anything and what do you want walking in. So it's like, I think worst is very relative, obviously.
Yeah.
In this context.
Yeah, agreed. Like we've never had any like horrible comic shop experience, thankfully. I mean, I guess I would say, what are the things that I like in a comic shop? I like a full but neat store. So, I came from a store that was very full but was cluttered, and that was always a source of frustration. Although I know people like that, opportunity to discover, but I like things to be organized. But I do like for there to be enough stuff for you to look at. To be honest, some stores you go into, especially younger stores that are just, building up, you could see everything that there is to see in a couple of minutes.
Right.
And that's not my favorite type of experience. So I like being able to like look around and explore, but I like for everything to be organized. I do like a store with a mix of things. I mean, yes, at heart, am I primarily there for comics and graphic novels? Yes. But I'm certainly not offended by like a magic section, even though I've never played Magic and I don't have any interest in it. Of course I like to see the pops and statues and action figures and things like that. So I like a mix of product with ultimately a focus on comics and graphic novels. And then, just in terms of atmosphere, it's nice to be greeted. I'm not offended if I'm not, but it's nice to be acknowledged when you walk in. I guess, there have been a couple of instances where, and I talked about this on the podcast when we were at Challengers in Chicago. There is that chain in Chicago, Graham Cracker Comics, and
oh right.
This was one of the trips that I went on for work that you weren't with me. And one of the days I went to one of the locations, and again, I can't say this is indicative of that store generally or of the chain generally, and I'm not saying that, but just in my limited experience at that one location that one day, it's like I was in there, I don't know, an hour, and at no point did anyone come up and say, hey, is there anything I can help you with? By contrast, I was at Midtown Comics. So, you and I work for Pace Law School, but sometimes we have business at the undergrad campus in Manhattan, the financial district, and there's one of the Midtown Comics locations, like right around the corner from that Pace campus. So occasionally I'll find myself in there, and to their credit, again, this is a major operation in a huge city, but they they've come around and said, is there anything you need help with? So typically I don't need help, or if I did, I would ask, but just as a matter of principle, it's like I think that's something that stores should do.
Yeah, I have to say, in the Midtown location of Midtown Comics, we were there one day just kind of stopping by, and a gentleman did come by and say, is there anything I can help you with?
Yeah. So again, that's generally what I like in a comic shop. And no, we haven't had, any horrible experiences. When we went on our honeymoon in Hawaii, we went to a quartet of shops. Correct. And there was that one, I forget the name, but it was the selection was kind of like, it was a real mix of stuff.
Yes.
In the store. And I remarked to the owner, because I saw that all of the comics, not just the back issues, but all of the comics on the new rack were bagged.
Correct.
And I said, oh, I noticed you bag all your comics. And
in a positive way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wasn't like, what the hell is this? And what was the guy's response?
He said, of course, we have to bag them all.
Yeah. Well, right? I think the reasoning was like the salt
water in the air.
Right. And so, yeah, I don't know. The response was just a little off-putting, but even more so because we had literally just come from another store that didn't have them bagged. So it's like, how is this really standard operating procedure? So, that was, a store where I wasn't like blown away, but, that's about it. I mean, there definitely haven't been any like horrible experiences. And
yes, for those of you who are listening carefully, we did go to comic shops on our honeymoon.
You wanted to go too.
So the next question, if you could interview any writers or artists for the podcast, who is at the top of your list?
It's funny because I think you're between my comic shop history and the forthcoming Superman podcast, my Superfan history, I think, listeners, that you're going to start to hear more creator interviews. If I had to put money on it, I would say that that's in the works. And I think that again, try to look on the bright side of like our current situation. And, I've now done a few podcasts remotely as a guest. I've been interviewed on a number of podcasts recently, and I actually quite liked the experience because, it's basically a phone call. And, because again, as obviously, as you know, Steph, and as listeners know, like I typically, with literally one exception, I've recorded all of my podcasts in person over all these years. And I do think there's something to that. I think that there's an intimacy with the podcast, especially when you're face to face, that lends itself to a good conversation and good content. And I also know, certainly as far as going to all of these stores, I know that the episodes were better by virtue of the fact that I was sitting in the store with the retailer looking around at everything, as opposed to, if I had interviewed Ben from Zap over the phone, never having set foot in the store. So I do think there's something to the in-person recordings, but I've definitely softened my stance on feeling like, oh, they all have to be that way, especially with creators, because, understandably, it's like their schedules are very demanding, and it's not, I don't expect them to say, oh yeah, come over to my house, nor do I necessarily expect them to make the trip to me. So, if it becomes a matter of like, well, if you want to have creators on the show, either you do it remotely or you don't have them at all, I think it's worth giving it a go of doing them remotely. So that's something that I think you're going to hear there's nothing definite set, but that's definitely something that I'm considering. As far as who it would be, look, Mark Waid was wonderful to interview for the documentary. I would very much enjoy being able to talk to him for an hour about Superman Birthright. Jeff Loeb wrote, and Joe Kelly, the two of them were behind my all-time favorite era of the Superman comics. So either or both of them would be really cool to talk to. And again, on the Superman theme, Peter Tomasi, he wrote Superman in the Rebirth era, and he wrote Super Sons, but he also wrote the most recent animated adaptation of Death of Superman, which of course was the comic storyline that got me into comics. And what he did with that movie, I've always felt like, again, Death of Superman has a special place for me, but I can also recognize, from a storytelling point of view, like it's mostly a slugfest for 7 issues and then Superman dies. But I always felt that there were like the bones of a really emotionally resonant story were there. And I felt that Tomasi realized and achieved the full potential of that story. Because I watched that animated movie and I was like tearing up at the end. I didn't have that response reading the comic. So I would love to talk to him. And I've met him obviously a couple of times. He's in the documentary during the sequence where we have the signing at All Yeah Comics. So I've met him a couple of times. Very nice guy. I think it's only a matter of time. I think we'll get him on the show one way or the other at some point. So that group would be close to the top of the list.
As you were talking about, like having them invite you over, having them come here, it reminded me of when we did have Mark Waid come to our hotel room in LA, and we were setting up and the lights were off because we had our spotlights and video lights on, and we realized like, wait, we've asked Mark Waid to come to this random hotel that who knows if has ever been to, and we're going to open the door and it's going to be completely dark inside, so quickly flipped the lights on before he arrived.
Yeah, he was such a good sport. I know, like in retrospect, that was very, very gracious of him.
Right.
I think it, having him and a number of the other creators as well. But especially him, I think that really added a lot.
For sure. Okay, so Eric has a couple questions. Was there anything that surprised you during filming? By that, I mean, did you get into any store expecting one thing to find something completely different?
Yeah. So nothing that was so shocking, because for the most part, we had been to most of the stores for the podcast the year before. So there weren't, there were some new stores for the documentary, but most of them we had already been to. I would say, I think I talked about this in the commentary a couple episodes ago, but Metropolis Collectibles in the city, on their website, they mentioned their showroom. And so, for people who've seen the movie or know Torpedo Comics, they have their vault which is set up to look like a bank vault, and they have their their rarest, most expensive books in there. Everything's CGC'd. It's quite a sight. And reading about Metropolis, like the showroom, I was anticipating something similar, and we went into it, and it was a rectangular room with white walls, and I think like a showcase or two in a corner, and a few books on a wall, but that was it.
Right.
And I think they were in the process of some renovation, so I don't know if maybe it's
well, they were in between exhibits, I think.
Okay.
And actually, he put up comics on the wall to have a background, because I think there
Yes.
actually wasn't anything or not much on the walls at that time that we happened to be there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because I remember like, like walking into the room, and it's like, oh, it's just white walls. So that was something where I was like, okay, we got to figure this out. And yes, they very graciously put stuff up, and you did a wonderful job in helping us, find the right angle and lighting and all of that. And we filmed both Vincent Cerzolo, who's the, one of the guys who runs Metropolis, as well as Paul Levitz. He came and we did his interview there too. So that was one thing where I was like, okay. And then West Village Comics was the store we mentioned before that, didn't make it into the final cut of the movie, but a very, very small space. Mm-hmm. And we had seen a couple of photos, but it was even smaller in person.
Right.
So we really had to get creative there. But other than that, I think certainly as far as like the physical layout, I think we knew what to expect. As far as like what we would capture, there's this whole bit in the documentary, this debate between one of the workers and a customer at Zap about Plastic Man versus the Punisher. And it's so perfect that I my fear is that people watching it are like, oh, this was staged. Like, it so perfectly captures the type of banter that you can have at a comic shop. But the reason I was surprised is that, again, I'm not at Zap on a regular basis, but from the time I've spent there and the rest of my filming, like, this was really this was very much an outlier in the footage that I captured at Zap. Like, for the most part, people came in, they picked up their books, they went down the wall of new stuff, they came up, they paid. Like, there wasn't a ton of chit chat, and it wasn't unfriendly, but it was just more efficient and more transactional. And then this customer came in, and then this amazing thing happened. So that was something that I didn't necessarily expect to capture at that particular store, and I was very pleasantly surprised. And it obviously it's in the movie, and I think it accomplishes a lot. So that was a very pleasant surprise. And then you had mentioned this before, but we were filming at Alternate Reality Comics, and in the same afternoon, the comic book writer James Robinson and the artist J.H. Williams III, both of whom live in Vegas and are regulars at Alternate Reality Comics, unbeknownst to us, happened to walk in. Like, this was not pre-planned. And so J.H. Williams, he's in it just for a moment. There's one little soundbite of his in the doc. But James Robinson gave us one of the greatest gifts in this film. Right?
That's right.
His description of
Ralph himself, which I was actually going to say was probably the most pleasant surprise, something not that I was not expecting. But just as far as the personality and presence that Ralph brings.
Yeah, so if you've seen the movie, you know this, but Ralph is like zipping around the store, and Robinson gives a wonderful description of him that at all of the screenings got the most consistent laughter. Mm-hmm. And but the reason why I say it was such a gift is that, as I was filming Ralph, it was legitimately hard to keep up with him with the camera. Right. And I felt a little frustration, and it's not his fault. Like, I didn't give him any direction. I was like, just do what you do as you stock the shelves. And he did, and I tried to keep up with him, and I was like, oh man, like, and I remember saying to myself, like, well, I can't use this footage. Like, it's me. Like, you literally see me like trying to move the camera to keep up with him. And then we got that description from Robinson, and all of a sudden, it was like, oh, like, this
all
works
came together.
Yeah. So yeah, those were definitely some things that I wasn't expecting.
The next question from Eric: has Steve Odo ever said no to any request you've ever made of him? He seems like he's a ridiculously good sport.
Yeah, one time. So a couple episodes ago, I did this audiobook special, right, where I read that lengthy profile of Steve that I wrote in college. And for people, especially on social media, if you saw, the artwork for that episode was this collage of photos of young Odo. I did not make that art specifically for this episode. Back in season 4 of My Comic Shop History, this was when we were starting to film the documentary, and I knew that I needed to build in some sort of break for myself. Like, I didn't want to have to be recording new episodes while also filming. I just knew it would be too much. So I had this idea, well, okay, we're going to do 12 episodes on conventions. I said, okay, let's do 6 episodes, then have this like 4-episode miniseries that I can record all in one shot or 2 shots, and then release it over a period of a couple months. And that'll give me some breathing room. And then we'll pick up with 6 more convention episodes. And my initial idea was to do the life and times of Steve Odo, where we would do 4 episodes. For as much as we've talked about his experience with alternate realities, like this would be all about his high school, college, law school years, leading into alternate realities. And I made the art, assuming, I was like, because again, to Eric's point, it's like he's always been very agreeable. And I sent him the art. I'm like, what do you think? And I guess he was somewhat concerned that he wouldn't remember enough. And his memory is a little questionable these days. And I think he also expressed a little concern for, he didn't want to like tell tales out of school. He didn't want to say anything about someone, that they might not want to be said, So I think those were his 2 concerns. I think if I had pressed him on it, if I had pushed him, I probably could have gotten him to do it. But again, I don't want to twist anyone's arm. So yeah, that was one thing that he did kind of decline. But again, I was able to use that art for the episode, so it all worked out. And, again, I guess it all worked out because that 4-episode miniseries, instead of being the life and times of Steve Odo, ended up being Buying Books with Ben from Zap, which to this day is one of the most popular run of episodes that we did, and people always mention it. So that run of episodes exists because Steve Odo said no to the life and times of Steve Odo as a miniseries a couple of years ago. But yes, generally speaking, he has been incredibly, gracious and accommodating. He's always game. These days, he doesn't always know, like, if we're filming or recording. Because remember when he showed up here to film the interview for My Comic Shop Country, and he was like shocked that there was a camera?
Yes.
Meanwhile, I had said like we're going to be filming it, but he thought like, oh, we're doing a podcast. So there's that. But he's usually game.
Yeah, good sport. Meth asks, if there is a sequel, would you also plan on interviewing customers as well?
So again, going back to what we said before, I very highly doubt that there will be a sequel. Watch, famous last words. But in a few months, I'll be like, are announcing the sequel. I don't think so. But as far as the customer thing, I don't know, maybe it didn't seem obvious, but like the customer perspective is represented, particularly when we interview the collectors. That's really, in my mind at least, where the customer perspective is represented, because that's telling you why people go to shops and why people collect and what happens to all of this stuff when it leaves the store. So, that segment of the movie, the people there aren't talking about specific shops, in fairness, but they are kind of speaking to like what drives them. So for me, that's how I wanted to represent the customer perspective. And so I feel like they are in there. And we did have a couple like on the spot, sound bites from customers. And I
was going to say, we did interview customers.
Yeah, we did. And, and again, even just through the customer interactions, like that debate at the store, like their perspective is represented. I guess, how do I put this? Because what I suspect, Meth is getting at is more, I don't know, maybe like store specific customer interviews where someone's really speaking about their experience at that particular store, maybe. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, logistically, that's a little challenging because, these aren't my local stores. So I would really be reliant upon the retailers to like set something up. You know what I mean? It's like, right. I don't have any mechanism to set this up in advance.
Yeah.
And like literally on the first day of shooting at Challengers in Chicago, we filmed a couple of on the spot customer interviews. And the people were lovely. Like it was, but it became, I very quickly saw what I was likely to get in these types of interviews. And it was a lot of like, oh, like I really like coming here. And I just felt like as far as the limited real estate that we had to
Right.
work with,
And time.
it was better served with, again, talking to the retailer, like getting these other perspectives. And so I hope no one takes that the wrong way and thinks, like, oh, he thinks it's not worth it to talk to customers. It's not that. It's just that, again, unless this was like really planned and we had the right people to, to kind of speak specifically about, distinct aspects. If it just became more of, like, why do you like shopping here? I think what would have been conveyed in those types of interviews, I think you see it. It's shown in the movie. Like, I don't think we needed to hear more people say, like, oh, I really like coming here because I get to talk about what I'm interested in. I think it's better to show that Plastic Man versus Punisher debate.
Right. Yeah, and I think the point of the movie and the story that you were trying to tell, yes, of course, customers are a hugely important piece of a comic book shop, and it's all about the heart of it. But it was somewhat being told, the vehicle that you chose to tell it was through the retailers mostly, and kind of the perspective of running the comic shop, more so than just shopping at it. And yes, from that perspective of from a customer, and any customers that we would have seen at a shop would be, it's a great store. I like coming here. I like the owner because that's why they're there. If to have any sort of tension or drama in the movie, you'd have to find customers who, wouldn't be in that particular store.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so moving on to the question from Z Money 2128.
This was our one Instagram question.
Do you listen to any comics podcasts?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I guess, making my own, that's where the majority of my podcast energy goes. But yeah, Word Balloon is really cool. I read comic books, which I was on recently. It is great. Greg Schiegel, his podcast has been on hiatus, but I always enjoy listening to him as well. I was recently on the Comics Chronicle podcast. That host was great. So that's a show that I didn't really know about before, but I do now. So yeah, a few. And then I also listen to, well, you and I are both massive Office fans, and so two of the actresses from that show have a podcast called Office Ladies, where they break down every episode. So I've been listening to that, and then Dax Shepard and Michael Rosenbaum, they have podcasts where they interview fellow celebrities. So again, these are not comics related, but they're great. And just in terms of like listening to interesting interviews, those are some of the ones that I enjoy.
Great. So from Justin, was any of the season 3 podcast filmed, or was it strictly audio? I know you had the idea for the doc during season 3. Just wondering if there was any overlap with season 3 recording and documentary production.
Nope. That might have made it it's interesting, because on one hand, that might have made things a little bit easier if we didn't have to go back to stores, but it also would have, I think, it would have been too much to try to film and record.
Yeah, and that was a calculated decision from the beginning.
Yeah, and because so there's one other reason why that didn't happen. I didn't have the equipment,
right?
The camera equipment until, so season 3 of the podcast was very much about forming the relationships with these stores, casting, kind of learning how I was going to tell this story, and then leading into the Kickstarter campaign to raise the money to buy the equipment that I would use to make the movie. So I literally didn't have the equipment that I used to make my Comic Shop Country until season 3 of the podcast was done. But beyond that, when I was thinking about what season 4 of the podcast, do you remember this? I remember we were in the car, and I was like, well, what do I do? Because I could have just easily put the podcast on hiatus, which would have been easier. But I said, no,
I feel like someone said that.
I was so jazzed after the Kickstarter, and I felt like, people pledged and they enabled me to be able to make this movie. And, I don't know, I just wanted to keep the podcast going. But I remember we were talking about this, and I was like, well, what do I, like, while I'm making the movie, what can I do podcast wise? And one of the ideas was like, well, what if we go to a store and we film them, right?
Right.
And then I do a podcast with them later. And I think you quickly talk sense into me, and I realized, like, that would be great. Like, honestly, even just from a lugging equipment perspective, especially when we were flying places, but even just in terms of, I typically cringe when people say this, but like just the bandwidth that is needed internally to again to like engage in a day of filming and then have an engaged conversation with someone on behind microphones. I think it just would have been too much.
Yeah. His next question is, have you considered an episode reuniting a lot of the AR crew to discuss how they feel the AR community has gone? Are they disappointed that the gatherings are fewer, or have they accepted it as a natural progression? I have several questions I can ask. I know this has been discussed with Steve, Bill, and Rich. Just wondering how others view it.
So, it's funny because over the years, a couple of the AR guys have been like, oh, you should set up a microphone when we all go out to dinner. It'll be an episode. And I understand why, like, from their perspective, that sounds cool. And maybe even as I'm saying this, people are like, oh, yeah, that would be fun. I think this is where, and I don't say this in a condescending way or anything like that, but I think this is where I really have to put my host hat on and really think about, and my producer hat, and really think about, well, what's going to make the best episode. So as far as having like a large group, like a large AR group episode, I don't think that would necessarily lend itself to an effective podcast. As far as just having more of the guys on to talk about it, I feel like it's been covered. And I think that, Steve and Bill and Rich, I think their perspectives are generally representative of what you would hear from most of the others.
Yeah.
I think pretty much anyone you would poll within the AR group would say that, the friendships have endured. Not everyone is in constant contact. We don't have the huge group dinners all the time. That they're much more infrequent, but that the friendships are still there. Smaller group gatherings, can happen. And that, not having the store as the gathering place has definitely been a hindrance to more regular content. I think that's generally what you would hear from people. And in my comic shop country, we do have Steve and Bill and Rich, but we also have Drew and Tom and Brian. So and that's basically what they say in the movie. So one of the episodes that I still hope to do at some point, one of the episodes as part of the Homecoming, I was going to do an episode with Tom Darby and Brian O'Day, where we would sort of speculate, like, what if alternate realities continued to do conventions and went on the road, and we sort of like were the ones running it, like a very what if episode. So there were plans, and I do plan to do this once the Homecoming can resume. So you will hear from more of the AR crew. And it's funny, speaking of Brian in particular, I do want to bring this up with him because in my comic shop country, he seemingly laments the fact that he's like, I don't know when we all get together at all anymore, right?
Right.
One of his big moments in the movie. And he says it again, like the sense I get is regret. Like it's a negative thing that we don't all get together. Yet he doesn't initiate. It's not like he puts out a call to everyone and is like, hey, it would be great to see everyone. And I'm not saying he should, this is not a criticism, but I guess that's something that I'd be curious to ask him about. Like, if you, and I've asked Steve this, the same thing. It's like, if it bothers you to whatever extent that we don't all get together, why not take the step to try to make it happen?
Right.
So I would love to be able to ask him about that. So, and I will.
And I think, just taking a step back for a second, the or question of are they disappointed or have they accepted it as a natural progression? I think it's both. I don't think it's an and or question. I think it's they're disappointed, but they also understand, and you also understand that it is a natural progression, a result of the store not being there anymore, and also people's lives changing, developing as a function of that as well.
I agree.
So the last question is from Bob. Do you now or have you ever read the letters page at the end of a comic? Have you ever written a letter to a comic and or gotten it published on the letter page? I always find it interesting, an interesting time capsule when reading a back issue to see what readers wrote about and what the response was.
The answer is yes to both. Unfortunately, they've really kind of faded away now, the letters pages, and I guess they're not really needed so much, right? Because people, you can post online and have those discussions there. But I definitely always used to read the letters pages, and especially, like as a kid in the 90s reading comics where I didn't have, friends of mine at school who were into comics, and I was shopping. I was getting comics at a comic shop, but I wasn't engaging in those types of conversations there. And, the internet wasn't what it is now. So, looking back on it, and I really didn't think about it until this question, but yeah, like the letters pages, that was probably, aside from like Wizard magazine, but that was like the only way I guess I would even get a sense of what other people thought about the comic I was reading.
Right, right. That was the comic shop.
Yeah.
Talk.
So I definitely always read them. And at one time I did write a letter to one of the Superman books, about one of the Superman books. I forget exactly which one or what it was about. It was not printed. Did not make it in, but that would have been cool if it had. And I think that's our last question.
That is. I think I have a question.
Yeah.
So is there anything that, kind of a spinoff of, was there anything on the cutting room floor? Was there anything, kind of flipping it, was there anything that we saw or experienced that you wish you got on video but didn't?
Nothing that comes to mind. Do you have anything?
No, I was trying to think about it too, but I think we had that camera rolling a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, nothing was staged in this. I mean, obviously stores knew we were coming, and, a lot of stores, thankfully they really accommodated us, and we would do the interview either before or after store hours, which made things infinitely easier because there were a few stores where we did it while the store was in operation, and that was a pain in the ass. I mean, there's no way, like, it was challenging. But, I know people have different, time constraints, and so, where we had to do it that way, that was fine. But other than that, and it's funny too, because, Ralph at Alternate Reality Comics, he posted on Facebook recently about the documentary, which I appreciate. And he talked about James Robinson and J.H. Williams. And he even said, he's like, it didn't even occur to me to like try to get them to come for this. Like it just happened that they were there. Right. So, it was really, we didn't quite know what we were going to get. And it's like, yeah, when the stores that I went to on a Wednesday, or, when Oh Yeah had their signing, or when Acme had their midnight release, it was like, okay, I mean, nothing's a guarantee, but you at least had a sense of like, okay, like, people are going to be lined up for the midnight release. There's going to be a fair amount of people at the signing. People are going to be hanging around chatting at the on the Wednesday. But other than that, any of the other stores, it was really kind of a crapshoot as far as like, well, will there be customers there? Will there be meaningful and or entertaining interactions? Like there was no guarantee. So, I'm really happy with what we got. Yeah, I can't think of any instance where like something happened and I was like, damn it, I wish I had been filming that.
Actually, there's two things, both related to Acme Comics. The first is we were waiting at Acme Comics for someone to be interviewed, and we weren't able to wait any longer. So who knows what that interview would have brought.
Oh, I know. Jermaine, he was like, oh, this guy's on his way. Yeah. He's a few hours. Then it got to the point where we had been filming for a while, and then we were waiting for a while, and I was pretty fried. So we just called it. But yeah, that was that interview that didn't happen. I think that was with the gentleman who helped Jermaine get the job there. I might be mixing this up, but he in the movie he says like, I had a friend who worked there, and then I would go and sort of help out as well. And I think that ultimately led to Jermaine getting the job. I think that's the friend he was talking about. Oh, speaking about surprises, Jermaine's parents.
Oh yeah.
That was a very pleasant surprise. That was like the kind of perspective that I wouldn't expect to get necessarily. And I saw there were a couple people, maybe this was on Twitter or something, but someone was like, their favorite moment in the documentary is when I asked his mom, like, oh, do you know Jermaine's alter ego? And she was like, oh, Lord Retail? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that was a very pleasant surprise.
And so the other thing related to Acme Comics is when you just said nothing was staged. Now, I don't know if we would consider this stage, but it was some egging on your part of one of the scenes in there.
What did I egg on?
You put Girusso up to some banter, let's call it friendly banter, with Jermaine.
I guess, but I don't think Chris needed any prompting, really. I feel like it was nothing out of but that was a little bit, not to shatter the illusion, but it was a little bit of a setup that we wanted to catch on film. Yeah, well, it's this whole thing of like the personality of the retailer, and with Lord Retail in particular, like it's just fascinating because again, I think, and I've talked about this, whether in interviews or other episodes of this show, but just the dichotomy between this grand alter ego. I mean, Lord of Retail, right? And then, but Jermaine is so unassuming and mild mannered. Obviously, very knowledgeable and passionate about comics and what he does. But it's just the personality, like it's fascinating, and just like, again, going back to the alternate realities movie. It's one thing to interview Steve and you get a sense of his personality, but getting everyone else's input, I think, just makes it so much richer. And so, especially for the personality of the retailer segment of this movie, and with Lord Retail in particular, having Austin, his assistant manager, having Gianrusso, a friend and creator and customer of Acme, and having his parents, like, getting those perspectives and getting everyone weighing in about, like, okay, this alter ego that he's created, it was fascinating. So yeah, I mean, I guess there was a little prompting there with Gianrusso, but yeah, still I wouldn't go so far as to say it was staged.
Well, thank you for answering all of the audiences and my questions, and kind of giving us more insight into the mind of the master behind the art.
I think this has been like 2 hours, and I didn't anticipate that this episode would run this long. But I thank you, and I thank all of our listeners who submitted questions. And I appreciate, Steph, your input and helping me answer some of those and giving your point. Was there anything that you wanted to add to any of the questions that maybe I didn't give you a chance to earlier?
No, I think I was able to interject where I felt that my opinion would be, I don't know, of value at all. Has it only been 2 hours?
Jeez. We're in quarantine, so I might as well do 3 hours. I don't even know now. Do I just put this out as a 2-hour episode? Do I break it up? I don't even know.
Put it out as a 2-hour episode. What else are people doing?
What else are people going to die now?
I mean, unless they're homeschooling, working from home, an essential worker, but anyone else who's looking for something to do in their free time.
Oh, yeah, one more question that I keep getting asked. It's fascinating to me because, and, people who follow on social media know, I've been posting about this movie a lot. I want to make sure everybody knows about it. I want to make sure they're excited about it. I want to make sure they know where to get it. And it's funny because, like, every time I post about it and I include the links, right? Sometimes I'm like, what? Like, people must know at this point where to get this movie. But I keep getting asked, especially on Instagram, but elsewhere too, where can I watch this? Where can I watch this? And this is not a complaint. I appreciate the fact that people care enough to ask. It's just so funny to me because to myself, I'm like, oh my God, like, people must be getting sick of these posts. I try to mix it up and I try to have valuable content and the deleted scenes and all that, but still it's like, oh, like, I don't want to beat people over the head with this yet. Apparently people still need more reminders. So Amazon and iTunes, obviously in the United States, and then it's also on the UK Amazon store. And on iTunes, it's in a bunch of international iTunes stores. So Canada, UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, there's a bunch of them. Non-English speaking countries, we've not expanded there. I don't know if we will. So people from other parts of the world have reached out. Like, there was someone in Israel, and there have been a few other places where the movie is not yet. I'm making a list and I'll share it with my distributor. I don't know if that's something that they would take action on. But anyway, but it is available, widely available, certainly throughout America and a number of other international territories as well. But for anyone who somehow got to the end of this episode and still didn't know where to watch this movie, and to everyone who has watched, whether you purchased or you rented it, if you were a Kickstarter backer and you watched it that way, if you came to one of the festival screenings, however you watch, well, not if you pirated it, I don't thank you then, but if you watched it through any of those other legitimate means, I appreciate it so much. And if you didn't, well, I don't know why you would listen to this commentary or the commentary 2 weeks ago or the Q&A now without having seen the movie. But I hope that, you're able to take the 90 minutes to watch it. I keep getting feedback from people who say that, it really made them, long for their comic shop. There was just someone the other day who wrote on Instagram that like they hadn't been to their comic shop in a while, even before this pandemic, and now this has inspired them to go back once they're able to. So that's that's a wonderful thing. I love to hear stuff like that. But so I'm immensely grateful to everyone who's watched. For anyone who hasn't, I encourage you to. I thank you, Stephanie, for your continued support. How have I been? We released this movie, during quarantine, like all this stuff going on. How have I been, like in the weeks after the release, generally?
We'll talk about it after the quarantine's over.
Oh.
No, I joke. No, I mean, methodical, organized, passionate. I wouldn't say that anything has been different or changed. I'm not sure what you...
Yeah, no, I know. No,
I mean, maybe stress levels or frustration has sometimes been a little higher, but again, not anything that would be affected by the quarantine.
No, I would agree with. I mean, I think my stress as far as like, getting the press opportunities and just how the movie's performing. I think my stress is a little amplified because there's no, like if we were going to work, it's like, I'm in a different space. Like I would have more distraction. There'd be more opportunity to sort of like, okay, turn that switch off. Right. But I don't feel, even though I'm working from home, like I think I've been a little bit more fixated on the release. I mean, believe me, it would have loomed large in my head anyway, but I think even more so now. I mean, I think where any frustration has come in, and this is probably what you've heard the most, is, just in terms of press opportunities, like we've had some amazing ones and I'm immensely grateful, but there's a singular moment happening right now where comic shops, the comics retail industry, is being covered in mainstream media like way more than ever before. I mean, there have been articles about comic shops, in New York Times, LA Times, Hollywood Reporter, Sci-Fi, USA Today, all these places. And it's like, I just wish that this documentary were part of that conversation. I think among people watching it and the people who have found it, it is. And, we were on Newsarama, and within the comics industry, that's amazing. But, I want this movie to be able to escape to achieve a certain escape velocity. And I think, that mainstream press is one huge way to get there. And so, there's a publicist I've been working with through the distributor, and obviously I've been engaging in my own efforts to try to get the movie covered by any of these outlets. And we'll see, and maybe something will have happened by the time people are listening to this. I don't know. But again, my continued hope is that this movie can be a big part of the conversation, an even bigger part of the conversation. And so yeah, that's, I know, something that you've heard a lot from me over these past few weeks, but it's just like, when have comic shops ever been in the news as much as they are now? And it's like, here's a movie all about comic shops that just came out.
That's relevant to the news.
That's right. Yeah. And that, suddenly we became very timely. So, so again, as far as my stress level, I guess that's how that's played out. But no, it's been a great release. And again, the response has just been tremendous. So I appreciate it. And I thank you for answering all these questions and being part of this episode. Always a pleasure. Hopefully we'll have you back before a year from now.
Yeah.
But so thank you. Thank you to all of our listeners. I hope everyone stays safe, healthy, sane, stay inside. Come back here in 2 weeks. Sean Hendricks will be back for our special epilogue episode to My Comic Shop Country. We'll talk all about how Sean became the owner of Fat Moose following the filming of the documentary. Until then, don't be a flat squirrel.